My name is Navid Zamani, and I'm going to show you how easy it actually is to display server-side OData messages in UI5. This is yet another example how great OData and UI5 work together. If you go to Google and search for Fiori error messages, you find the design guidelines of the Fiori Design Guidelines with this simple example. We have 4 fields that contain errors, and the fields also have error messages. In the footer of the application, you have a button that shows you the amount of messages you are having. And if you press the button, a message popover shows up containing the messages with additional details. Now the question is, how can we actually implement such a feature in UI5? Of course, we have to differ between UI messages, which are the messages created on the front end. Example is, for example, for form validation. And on the other side, we have the server-side messages that you receive from some backend service, for example, your OData service. If you search for some documentation, the best place to go for now is the developer guide. Search for messages, and here's everything you find. Unfortunately, I believe this is not enough of documentation, so there is some room for improvement here. I think the best way to illustrate something is by running examples. And for this, I have created 3 different examples in my local explored app. In the first example, we're going to see how things work when we use front-end messages. Then we're going to see how we can display error messages we receive from an OData backend. And in the third example, we see how this actually works in a component-based application, and it even includes a demonstration of how the SAP message header works. Okay, time for a live demonstration. So for this, I'm going to my shell first of all, and I'm starting everything here. Okay, that's it. Now I go to my browser, go to my explored app that I'm running here on localhost. You can just clone that from the GitHub repository, the OpenUI5 GitHub repository. Now I'm going to search for message, and here I have some examples, the examples for the message manager. So let's start the first example. I'm going to open the console as well. Here we go. So we have 4 input fields up here and a 5th one up down here. The 4 first input fields, we trigger error messages by pressing one of the first 4 buttons from the left side, the first 4 buttons. The value state button is for this value state only field. When I press clear, I expect that all the messages are removed. Before I start, here's a little information. This is a white footer. It should actually be the dark gray color that you're used to. However, there seems to be a bug, and I've reported this about 2 weeks ago. Let's see what happens. So now let's create some errors. Some automatic errors first of all. This is a mandatory field, and I'm going to type in here 1 character. It says there's an error because I need at least 3 characters. Okay, so I create 3 characters, the error is gone, and if I type in more characters, more than 10, I get the error back again that tells me, hey, you can enter at max 10 characters. If I remove this field, I still have an error because I need at least, it's a mandatory field, and I need at least 3 characters. Okay, let's put in here 1 character. Now I'm going to see that suddenly there's the button that showed up. I have a message here, and this message is exactly the message that I have up here, right? So if I press in here, there's another error. Unfortunately, this here is a little overlaying here. So I'm sure this will be fixed soon. Now I'm going to close this again, and I'm causing another error. So here, okay, obviously this is not a valid date, and it's added here again. Then I type in here an integer larger than 100, I get an error because I can only use up to 100. And if I type in here something like this, then of course I get an error because this is not a valid integer. And all the 3 messages so far, they are here. Now I go back here to the message buttons, and what I do next is I press the info button. Oops, there's an exception, and this exception is not my fault. Let me tell you why. We're using the message model, as you will see in a few seconds, and from the message manager, and in there we have messages, and messages have a certain type. The messages have the following types here on the left side, so error, information, success, and warning. The input fields on the other side, they use the value states. So value states currently available are error, success, and warning, for example. And as you can guess, the type information from the message type is not here in the value state. So there's no corresponding type in the value state, and that causes the exception inside of UI5. I hope this gets fixed soon after this video gets published. So now the best thing to do is, because we had this exception, I need to reload the whole application just to be sure that the rest of the code of the examples I'm trying to show you still work. So here we had an error, we caused an error here, we caused something like this here, and then we go here. I'm not going to press the information button. And as you can see, by the way, here are the messages again. I'm going to close this. Now I'm pressing the warning message, great, and it got here increased. And here I can see, again, it's from the message button. And this time, if I press the information button, guess what? It works. So in this time, I pressed it. This field is not highlighted as an information message. However, it works. The message was added, and I don't even get the exception. So we have two different cases. In one case, it gets the exception is thrown, in the other, it's not thrown. Okay, now I'm going to the value state field. Now I'm going to create a success message. Okay, success message is here. However, because the warning, let me say, is more important, I don't even see the success message. I guess this is the reason. And if I create an error message, it turns to error here, as you can see. And the error message gets displayed, and I can see it here. Now, the funny part is when I press, what happens if I press the value state. So if I press the value state, my value state text for error. And if I go here, the text is not in here, as you can see. This is because I'm doing this directly by setting the value state on the input field. And because it's not in here, if I press the clear button, all the messages are gone, the error messages. Only this one error message stays, the error stays here because it's set directly on the input field. At the same time, I guess you've seen that I get this exception. This exception occurs whenever I have an error message and this here is opened, and then I remove all the messages from the message model. You will see this in the code in a second. And then I get the exception. So this is another bug in UI5, and hopefully this gets fixed soon as well. Okay, this is example number 1, and now the question is, how does the code like? So in this example, I'm going to show you the code directly here in the browser. So first of all, we have our view. And our view is a simple page, not a semantic page, a simple page, which has a form. The form uses form container. And in the form container, I have for each row of the form, I have a form element. So different form elements here. And the form elements have labels and some input fields. Okay, so this is, for example, the input field that uses the type string. So in other words, all the input fields use types. So here the one has a string with some constraints. The date picker is of type date. And then the integer field is of type integer with this constraint right here. And then we have also a field for message buttons. There is no type used for that. So these are the 4 buttons that we press for generating errors. And then we have also another field, which is just having, it's for the value state only example. In the code, we're binding here everything to a property in our model. So we will see this now in a control in a second. But before that, let me scroll down to show you the button that shows up whenever errors are available, whenever messages are available. So this is quite easy. It's a button, and the text shows you from a named message model. At the root, it tries to find out the length And if this length is larger than 0, so in that case I have more than 0 messages, then the visible property is true, and else it's false. Okay, that means I need a message model. And then I have also some buttons, and these are exactly the buttons that trigger my actions. So let's go to the controller. From the top, we scroll down, and I'll show you what's important. First of all, we're getting a reference to the message manager. This is a singleton, and it's coming from the core. That means you have one message manager throughout all your application that you run. So after this, I'm getting the model of the message manager. It's called the message model, and I'm putting it on the view as a named model. Next, I would have to activate automatic message creation for the controls. I could do this one by one for each control that I have on the front end. However, I'm so lazy, so I don't do this. Instead, I just use the message manager and call register object for the whole view, and then I'm fine. And this is my model, and the fields that I'm binding in the view, they are binding to these properties right here. Okay, so I have a model. This is my view model, and this model I put on a view like this, and the properties are bound in the view to these properties. The view is bound to these properties. Okay, when I press the pop over, that shows up only if there are messages available. Then I'm getting a reference. I'm lazily loading everything from a fragment. The fragment is right here. So let's have a look at the fragment. It's quite easy. So the items, here we're talking about aggregation binding, they come from the message model. Don't forget that this message model is the model we receive from the message manager. And then the type is coming from the property, from the relative property called type. The title comes from the message. The subtitle is the additional text, which is basically the name of the field. And then we could have a description, which in our example we don't have. Okay, next, let's go back to the controller, scroll down a little bit, and we see what happens when I press the success handler. So in the success handler, I'm creating an instance of a message. This is SAP UI, where is it? It's coming from here, which is here, SAP UI core message. And then we're also going to use the message type, which is here, and the value state. So when we have a success message, I'm creating an instance, passing the message text actually, and then the type. In this case, it's a success type, and I'm binding to a dummy field from our model, which is the dummy property. And the processor is the model itself. So I'm getting the model of the view and passing it here to the processor. Once I have this instance, I pass it to the message manager by calling add messages, and here I pass the message. I could add multiple messages at once as well. The same thing is actually happening for the error handler. However, here I have an error type. Then for the warnings, I have a warning type. And for my information, I have an information type. And that's it. Everything stays the same. And then in case of the value state button, I get a reference of my input field. And on the input field, I directly call set value state to error. And then I call set value state text to some text of my choice. So there's a difference. So here I'm using the message manager, and here I'm using the input field itself. So now this is the reason why when I press the clear button, these fields here, these errors from the value state, they are not removed automatically, because in here I'm getting the message manager, and then I'm calling remove all messages. And that's why, because these messages are not inside the message manager or inside the message model, they're not removed. Okay, this was the first example. And what I'm going to do next is we want to go to the second example. But before we go there, let's have a look what actually OData gives us. And in fact, OData has actually a well-defined format for error responses. Now the question is, how do you find the format? Well, search on Google for OData v2 error responses, and then this is where you will get. It's a page on odata.org. And in here you can read the format for error messages is described in here and here. However, if you press this one item here, you will see that this document doesn't exist anymore, and the other document does not even contain the word error. So there is nothing. So it's lost information, I guess. Okay, let's give it a try and search for OData 3 error responses. And this is what you will find, and that's great. This is exactly what we want. So the format looks like this. We have an error property here, type is object. And then we have two mandatory properties. One is code and one is message. Additionally, there is an inner error property, and the content of that depends totally on the service. So we could define whatever we want in here. Interestingly, there's a note saying a production service must not ever respond with an error that includes an inner error name value pair. However, as you know, SAP Gateway, this always is returned to the user, to the front end. There are actually some reasons for this, because as you can see, here is no error details in version 3, but the gateway sends also error details to the front end. Now, if you search for OData 4, you can see that we have a details section here. So in OData 4, we still have the error. Then we have a mandatory code and message. The target is optional, and details are also optional. But in OData 4, instead of having some details down here on a per service feature, we have a details section, and in here we can have objects, an array of objects, and each object has at least a code and a message. The target here is again optional. So this is OData 4, and this here stays as well. So now let's see, for example, how the SAP Gateway would do that. This is a simple ABAP code that shows you how you can easily create an OData response in a version 2 OData service. So we just throw an exception, and the exception is just saying my method is not implemented. If you want to add additional messages, you can use Gateway APIs to add messages by using the message containers in your services. Okay, if you execute your service and that code on the previous slide gets hit, this is the response. As you can see, we have a message on top. SAP calls this a leading message. It has a code and it has a text. Then we have some inner details. As you know, everything in inner error in OData 2 is optional. We don't care about these items here, but what we care about are these error details. The error details also have a code, a message, we have a property ref, we have a severity, and we have a target. And this here actually, this is also from SAP, and SAP has defined to use that. So a lot of this, by the way, because SAP have to standardize OData 4, a lot of their experience has made it into the OData 4 experience, I guess, and that's why in OData 4 we have a detail section, and there we have even the target. Okay, so who knows this here? Well, I have asked this in the session yesterday at the UI5Con, and a lot of people said, yeah, we know this. They raised their hands. I know this is an error for a few years now. It has not been fixed so far. I have checked for this for the UI5 conference yesterday. Why does this actually happen? And in fact, I have reported this some while ago. Anyway, this is the reason why it happens. It's because UI5 parses the messages from the OData like this. It has an OData, the A messages array here. This is containing all the messages, including the so-called leading message. What it's doing is it's comparing the first message with the second message. If the first message code equals the code of the first message, the first message code is equal to the code of the second message, and the message text itself, they are also equal. In that case, the UI5 decides to get rid of the message. That's great, because that would make sure to not display duplicated messages. Okay, however, this is what the gateway is sending us. So we have a code here in the leading message, and then the error details have a different message. So this would be message 1, and this is message 2, and the code is different. But even if we had the same code, we can see that even the value, the text, the message text here and here, there's a difference. There's a dot and there's not a dot, and everything else is the same. So that means we have, for some reason, I guess that Gateway and UI5, there's something not correctly aligned, and I hope that this will get fixed soon as well. Okay, now with this, we go back to our messages example. And this time now we're going to, with this background that we have about OData messages, we're going to the basic OData message example. And here I have a delete button. It just was loading the data from my mock server. And here we have a delete button and a clear button. If I press the delete button, an OData request is sent to delete the item that I have here. However, I'm getting a response, and from the console you can see this is an error response from an OData service. It's a mocked service, but you're used to this because this is similar to what SAP Gateway would send you. Okay, so we have messages. Here we have an error, success message. However, the success message for some reason does not display the message itself if you click into the field. The warning message on the other side, it shows the message. Great. The error message shows it as well. And these are messages we have from the backend. Now let's have a look what we see. We have 6 messages, but only 3 fields here are highlighted. This is because, first of all, we have a leading message. It doesn't know which field is belonging to that. And then we have another exception, which is here. Now, let me go to the code to show you where this actually comes from. Let me go to the code. The code is actually right here. I'm going here, response. This is my OData response. So this here was the leading message, which is here. And then we have server, and then we have this one message here, which is here, exception raised without specific error. And then we have a server side does not like my zip code. It's for the postal code right here. And it's of type error, which is here. And then we have another item for the first name. It's a success message, which is here. So UI5 here knows it's for the first name. That's the message. That's why the first name is highlighted green, but if I click in here, no message is displayed. I only see it here in this message popover. And then I have a warning and also an information message. The warning goes to the last name. This is the warning. And the information message in this case, as you know, because of this little message type gap, I chose not to put in here the property ref or the target in order to avoid the exception for the demonstration. Okay, so this is how it worked, and from this now you can also see that property ref is here. Here I use just the whole path to the corresponding property. And in this case, I also use the whole path, but this time I use target. In that case, I use property ref, the property of a certain target. That works as well. So as you can see, UI5 seems to be pretty flexible, and I guess that the format here, property ref, is an SAP thing. Target is more OData 4 kind of thing. But it works also for OData 4, 2 and 3. Okay, so what did we have what do we have here? Here we have nothing else to say but clearing the messages. Okay, the message popover was open. I press the clear button and suddenly I get an exception here. This is another bug in UI5. It seems to be a bug at least. And this happens only if I have messages and this message popover is open, and then if I remove all the messages from the message manager, then it comes up. If I close this and I press clear, as you can see, nothing happens. There is no additional error coming up, right? So just to give you another example, I open this, I get an error, I clear the messages, no additional exception in JavaScript is thrown. Now I'm doing this again. I'm opening this here. I'm pressing clear and suddenly I get the exception. So I'm sure this can now get fixed as well with this little demonstration. Let's have a look at the code itself. And it starts, of course, again with the view. The view is quite simple. We have a simple page, and in the page we're having a form, and in a form I'm having a label and input fields, and this time I'm just using a very simple form, right? And everything else stays the same. If I go to the controller, I can tell that here everything else, we know that already. So here we get the message model, put it on a view as a named model. Then yeah, we also have to register the view. That's important, we did that. And then I'm calling mockserver.init. And after this, I'm creating my OData v2 model here. And yeah, and then I'm creating a binding on a view which goes to my first employee that I have in my mock data. My mock data is basically this here, and that's the data I'm displaying because I'm creating this binding for that one item. And if I go back to the controller, now the interesting part is that first of all, when I delete an item, I'm just getting the binding context of the view, and then from that I'm getting the path, which will be basically this here, right? And then I'm saying, hey, on the model, remove this path. And then a typical OData delete request is sent to my mock server, and this is interpreted then by my mock server. I'll show you this in a second. When I press clear, same thing, I'm removing all the messages from the message manager, and that causes the JavaScript exception that I just showed you. Okay, next thing is, let's have a look at the mock server itself. The mock server itself is not very interesting. It's using, you know, this from all the tutorials, but here it gets interesting. So I'm getting a reference, I'm getting all the requests from the mock server. The requests that the mock server has actually derived from what it could get out from the metadata XML. So there we have the entities and the entity sets and so on, right? That's why the mock server knows what requests must be available. So I'm getting all the requests. Then I'm loading my file right here. This is the error response I just want to send to the front end in case a delete request is sent. So this is my error response. I'm loading this with jQuery easily. And then for each of the requests, I'm checking, hey, is this a delete request? Is the method delete? And is it for the employees entity set? And if that's the case, I'm mocking the server. I'm mocking the service response. And this I do with a little helper function. It gets the error code. It gets the response that should be sent to the front end in that case, to the client. And this is needed because I need to change the request that I got from the mock server. So in that case, I'm calling this helper function. The helper function, it's basically, by the way, the mock server is using sign-in.js. So what we have here is sign-in.js. I'm taking the OXHR object here, and I'm calling the respond method on it, passing the error code that I got here, and the content type is JSON, and this is basically my error messages that I have passed here, and this I loaded from here. And this way I'm mocking a simple response. So that's it. And now let's go and see how the next example looks like. For that, I'm going back, and I'm going here. This is now the third example. As you can see, we have 4 input fields, and we have a few buttons down here. If I change any of the values in the input field, then the save button gets enabled. I could revert the changes as well. If I change any of the values, I could also check if there are pending changes in my OData model. So here again, I can change something, I can revert everything back. So let me change it here again, and here I'm just creating an invalid date. It tells me, hey, the date is invalid, right? And if I press revert changes, everything gets reverted. These two got reverted, but the date does not get reverted. I think this is a bug in UI5 as well. Let's do it again. Here I have a change. Here it says pending change is false because it was not written to the model. And I guess pressing revert changes here doesn't do anything here because it's not written to the model. So there's a bug somewhere. To continue now, unfortunately, I do have to reload the whole application. And this time we're using a component-based application. Okay, here we go. Here we go. Now, next example, what I'm going to show is also another bug. So this is the 30th, the initial date. I'm setting it to the 31st. I have pending change, true. I'm pressing revert. It gets to the 30th. It gets back reverted. Great. Now I'm choosing the 2nd. Great. I have pending changes. And now I'm choosing it back to the 1st, which is the initial value. However, I still have a pending change. This is for me also a bug. In contrast, I'm pressing now revert, and in contrast, this is Janet. I'm changing this. I have a pending change. Now I'm changing this back to Janet. And as you can see, in this case, it gets right. So UI5 works correctly. This is not considered as a change because this is the original initial value. Okay, so what I'm going to do, I'm going to change something here. First of all, I'm going to remove these values, these fields, and they are mandatory. However, the front end does not care about this because the back end does validate those fields. If I press this here, I can see there are pending changes. That's why the save button is enabled. Here I press save now. It goes to the back end, and the back end responds with an error message. And here I get the message. It says, first of all, this would be the leading message. It says, hey, employee was not updated. Second, first name must not be empty and the last name must not be empty. And it tells you this is for the first name and this is for the last name. This works cool because here I have a form. This is an input field. It is bound to the first name property of the entity that we tried to update. And the error message that we got is also for the first name and for the last name. And that's why UI5 knows any field that is bound to this property should be highlighted as having an error. And the label, this is the label, this is what we see here. This is what UI5 does for us as well, automatically. Okay, so now I know I have to change this. So I'm saying Navi, it's money, and I'm whenever this is, oops, that is my birthday, and now I'm going to say save. We have 3 messages, now we have 4 messages. Okay, let me open that. So we have those messages. So first of all, the data was successfully saved. Oh, that's interesting. And then I have a success detail message. I don't see any of them here. And then it says an information message saying, hey, nice first name. And the first name likes my first name. And think about changing your last name. So my backend doesn't like my last name. Now, the exception that we got, we noticed already. This is the gap between the different value, the value state type and the message type. What we're going to do next is we're having a look at the code and see how this actually could happen and work. For this, we're opening this here, and this time we're having a component-based application. So this index file is straightforward. You know it from the tutorials. The component is pretty easy. In this case, we only set the message model on the view as a named model. And the manifest is important because, oops, there's something we need to do. We set handle validation to true. And that's basically everything we need to do in terms of configuration. And then we have a view which has all our fields. We have the input fields right here. And then we have the birth date of type birthday. And then we have the hire date of type date as well. So 2 dates. And then everything else, we know that already stays the same. And even the fragment is the same that we have seen earlier. Now, Now the funny part is here in the controller, first of all, what I'm doing is on the employee route, when the route is matched, I'm creating the binding for my third item of my data set. So it's employees with the ID 3. And in here, I register for the change event. So if I get data, then everything is fine. But if there's no data from the backend, this is what comes up. If the data is available, and in our case it's always there because it's in the mock data, then I'm executing this code exactly once here. So now what I'm doing is I'm attaching to the change event, and when something changes on the binding here, what I can do is I just check, hey, is there a change, a pending change? And if yes, I'm setting a dirty flag to true, and if not, I'm setting it to false. And this is just for my save button, because my save button is basically getting this enabled if dirty is true, only in that case. Okay, so this is straightforward actually, and yeah, nothing else except when I press the save button, I'm getting the model and submitting the changes on the OData v2 model, and that's it. So in a typical scenario, of course, you would not submit all the changes. You might have scenarios where you might want to change only a few items, and in that case, you have to work with group IDs and whatever the v2 model offers you. Okay, next, what I'm going to do, let's have a look at the mock server itself. So first of all, we have the mock server right here. And the mock server is, again, everything straightforward. But here I'm loading an error response template. This is a template which is right here. And it's basically not the complete error message. So I'm loading this, and then I'm putting values in JavaScript in here dynamically in my mock server response implementation. And then I'm also loading another file, which is the message header. And in this message header, it looks like this. I have some additional messages. I'll tell you what this is for later. Now, when I scroll down, I'm getting again all the requests, and then I have two helper functions here. But again, the important part is right here. So when I call the get method for employees, I'm just expecting that it's always for my get employee by ID. I'm calling get entity response by ID, and this here is just returning my employee that I have loaded here from this one file. Okay, so I'm just returning the stupid data here in case of the get request. Now, if an update is sent to my employee, then I'm calling this here. This is how it gets mocked. Here's the response object, the response function. And what I'm doing is, first of all, I'm parsing the current data that I get from here. So this is basically the update data that the client has sent me. And then I'm validating this data. And in this validation, I'm checking just for first name and last name. If the first name is empty, I'm adding a new object to my error handler, to my errors array. And the same thing I do for this here, for my last name. And then we go back here. These are the errors. And if I have errors, I start to take my response template and I put in the errors there. So that's it. And then I just return the response template, which I have loaded. So this is the message that I sent to the front end in case of input field or first name or last name does not have a value. If everything is fine, I just take the data that I have received from the front end and I assign it to the corresponding fields of my employee, because this is a mock server, so I have to make sure things stay consistent. And then I send the response back to the front end. And again, it's the same employee that I'm sending with the updated values here, of course. However, in that case, I'm doing something very special, which is this right here. In that case, I'm sending a message to the front end. Now let me right quick disable that. Go back here. I'm now reloading everything. Okay, it's there. It's not because UI5 is so slow, by the way. It's because my laptop is from 2010. So it's a very old laptop. Okay, now I'm going to change this here back again. Okay, this is what we got. And I'm now pressing the save button. And as you can see, I guess it must have worked, right? We don't see anything. No success message, nothing. Now, how about in case of a save, you want to return a response to the front end, some messages, something like it worked, great, whatever, or some information messages. However, in the response, you're already returning the in the body of the response, you're already returning the employee data, right? So you need another way to send some additional message information to the front end. So in that case, SAP has chosen to send an additional header, which is the message header. And this message header in my case will be, let me just reload that while I'm talking. And in that case, this message comes from here, from a file that I'm loading. It is here. That's the format. So a message, this should be, I guess, the leading message. And I'm saying everything was saved successfully, and it's a success message with a code. And then I have some details. In the details, I say my success detail, and I like, nice first name, and think about changing the last name. It's hard-coded. And with this, I have just mocked how the message header, SAP message header, works seamlessly. So again, in this case, if I'm going to change this here to any value like this, I press the save button. This time I get the message header. Don't worry about the information. And the message header has those messages. Great, that worked. And the information, as you can guess, it comes from here, and that's why I get the exception on the front end. Okay, that's it. I did not talk about a few other important things. For example, the message, let me go right here to the SDK. And then I'm going here. For example, there is a message lifecycle, right? And we didn't talk about persistent stuff and so on. So here are a few things that can help you maybe. And in fact, if you're interested in the code, you can just go to my GitHub fork of OpenUI5 right here. And during the talk yesterday at the UI5Con, I have actually created a live pull request. So let's see if these 3 examples that I just talked about will be part of the Explored app in a future release of OpenUI5. So thank you very much. Enjoy your Saturday, and see you in June this year, hopefully. Bye.